The new tenant. There was a house at the edge of a remote town that everyone avoided. It was a crumbling relic of a bygone era, its walls steeped in shadows and secrets. Locals whispered that it was haunted, cursed by a ghost who had driven away every tenant with its terrifying antics. For decades, the house remained empty, shrouded in eerie silence. One fateful day, a man named Victor arrived. He wasn't like the others who had dared to live there. Victor was peculiar, with an unsettling calmness that clung to him like a dark cloud. His piercing eyes seemed to drink in the gloom of the house as if it welcomed him. What no one knew was that Victor wasn't running from ghosts, he was running from the law. A cold-blooded killer, Victor needed a secluded place to carry out his grim work undisturbed, and the notorious house seemed perfect. From the moment Victor stepped inside, the ghost stirred. It had been waiting, ready to drive him out like all the others. It started small, muttering unintelligible whispers, creaking floorboards, and distant footsteps. But Victor didn't react. He moved through the house methodically, unpacking his belongings, knives, ropes, and other ominous tools. The ghost watched, puzzled by his indifference. Over the next few days, the ghost escalated its haunting. It slammed doors shut, sent chairs skidding across the floor, and caused lights to flicker ominously. Still, Victor remained unfazed. He barely seemed to notice, humming to himself as he worked. At night, the ghost appeared in its most frightening form, a pale, spectral figure, with hollow eyes and a ghastly grin. It floated just inches from Victor as he sat at the dining table, but Victor simply leaned back, sipped his drink, and muttered, "Strange draft tonight." For the first time in decades, the ghost felt something it never had before: frustration. No matter what it did, Victor refused to acknowledge it. But the ghost wasn't just frustrated, it was unnerved. There was something deeply wrong with this man, something more terrifying than anything the ghost had ever encountered. A growing horror. As days turned into weeks, the house transformed into a macabre lair under Victor's reign. The ghost, though unseen, was forced to witness the atrocities he committed. Victor lured unsuspecting victims into the house: delivery drivers, drifters, and even the occasional neighbor curious about their new resident. Each night, the house echoed with muffled screams, and by morning, another lifeless body joined the growing number buried in the backyard. The ghost was horrified. It had spent years tormenting people, driving them away, but this was something different. Victor's indifference to its presence was unnerving enough, but his cold, methodical murders were a nightmare the ghost couldn't escape. The once lonely house now buzzed with a sinister energy as the spirits of Victor's victims began to linger, trapped by the violence of their deaths. The ghost tried to reach out to the new spirits, but they were too consumed by fear and rage to respond. Their cries filled the house, a cacophony of grief and despair. The ghost had never felt such helplessness. Its once fun hauntings were meaningless now. The house wasn't a haunted home anymore. It was a tomb. Determined to fight back, the ghost tried harder to disrupt Victor's activities. It knocked tools from his hands, caused the power to flicker when he worked, and even loosened the soil in the backyard graves to make his work more difficult. But Victor only laughed. "This house has character," he'd mutter, as if the chaos amused him. One night, the ghost made a bold move. As Victor sat sharpening his knives in the dimly lit kitchen, it manifested fully in front of him, its translucent form towering over the table. With a guttural growl, it slammed the knives across the room. Victor paused, looked directly at the ghost, and smiled. "That's some theatrics," he said, his voice eerily calm. "But you'll have to do better than that." Then he stood, picked up his knives, and returned to his work without another glance. The ghost was shaken. Victor had seen it, acknowledged it, and dismissed it as if it were nothing. Desperation began to creep in. The ghost realized it couldn't face this monster alone. It needed help, and it didn't have to look far. The house was full of restless spirits, and together they might be able to stop him. Part 3: The Final Showdown. The spirits of Victor's victims were restless, their rage simmering beneath the surface. The ghost, once the house's sole resident, gathered them together. It spoke to them in whispers, urging them to channel their pain and anger into action. Victor had to be stopped, not just for their sake, but for the countless others he would kill if he remained unchecked. The spirits, once fractured and lost, now had a singular purpose: revenge. Victor continued his gruesome routine, unaware of the storm brewing around him. The spirits waited for the perfect night to strike, biding their time. When a violent thunderstorm swept through the town, they knew their moment had come. As Victor worked in the basement, preparing his latest victim for burial, the house began to turn against him. The lights flickered wildly before plunging into darkness. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, growing louder until it became an ear-splitting wail. The basement door slammed shut, trapping Victor inside. Victor frowned, his calm demeanor finally cracking. He grabbed a flashlight, but its beam only illuminated the horrors around him. Shadows writhed along the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach for him. The spirits began to materialize, their faces contorted with anger and pain. "Victor," the ghost boomed, its voice echoing like thunder. "Your sins have bound us here. Now you will pay the price." Victor tried to move, but the floorboards beneath him groaned and shifted, holding him in place. The spirits swarmed him, their icy hands clawing at his skin. Victor fought back, swinging his knife wildly, but his strength was no match for their supernatural force. As the spirits pulled him toward the darkest corner of the basement, Victor began to laugh, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills through even the ghost. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You think this will end me?" The spirits hesitated, but the ghost pressed forward, refusing to let Victor's words deter them. With a final, unified surge of energy, they dragged Victor into the shadows, his laughter fading into silence. The house went still, the oppressive weight of his presence finally lifted. For the first time in years, the house felt quiet, peaceful. The ghost and the spirits stood together, their torment seemingly at an end. But as they began to fade, a low chuckle echoed through the walls. Victor's voice. Somewhere, in the darkness of the house, his spirit lingered. Not a man anymore, but something far worse. A predator. Waiting. Watching. The house was no longer haunted by the tormented souls of the past. It had become Victor's new hunting ground, and anyone who dared to enter would face a terror far greater than anything the ghost could have ever imagined. Subscribe for more chilling tales of horror and suspense.